For this section, we're going to look at the American family as it has been seen through television sitcoms. To begin with, we need to discuss what is a sitcom. Sitcom, as we currently know it, is actually short for the situation comedy. A situation comedy is usually a short episode ranging about a half hour, which features characters sharing some sort of common environment. This may be a home, it may be a workspace, it may be a school. Usually, sitcoms are accompanied with jokes that further the plotline. The sitcom format was born January 12, 1926, with the first radio broadcast of Sam and Henry on WGN in Chicago. Eventually, this show became Amos and Andy. Other programs, such as the Jack Benny program, premiered. These were sometimes more of a variety show, meaning you would have guests that would come on and perform. And eventually, these transitioned over to television. Fibber McGee and Molly was on the radio from 1935 to 1959, and this became one of the most successful sitcoms of all time. In 1940s, sitcoms were one of the first formats that were actually adapted for television. So why study the American family through sitcoms? Why? Because most of the time this gives us an idea of what we imagine as this ideal American family. Or we see it through the anti-ideal family. Often we see versions of ourselves within these characters or of life that we would like to have it. Often these shows also reflect the changing values in the nation and reflect what is becoming more culturally acceptable. For example, we are going to start looking at shows from the 1950s. Topics that were discussed on current television would never be able to be on these television shows. Also, we have different things such as public acceptance for our changing culture. For example, Ellen DeGeneres had a sitcom called Ellen, and in 1997 she came out publicly as a lesbian on this show. It was the puppy episode. And this was a cultural phenomenon that somebody actually did this on a television show. And we're going to see things like the acceptance of single family parents, homosexuality, and even eventually showing couples and families based on homosexuality. We're going to look at topics such as race, including the Jeffersons, Good Times, The Cosby Show, Blackish. And so that's why we're going to look at it. One thing I want you to remember, though, is ours is a very brief overview, that we are looking at a very, very small subsection of American culture in this. Why? We just don't have time. Honestly, though, if you're interested, you can look. There are classes that focus just on this topic. All right, well, first we're going to talk a little bit about the article you read, The Way We Wish We Were, Defining the Family Crisis. This is from Stephanie Kuntz's 1992 book, The Way We Never Were. And what she's talking about here is we're talking about this idea of the traditional American family. So first, take a few minutes and think about what does that mean to you when you hear of the ideal American family or the traditional American family. What does that actually mean? What is it made up of? Where do they live? What race are they? What do they do for jobs? Things such as that, and think about that. And what Kuntz is challenging is that this ideal, right? This idea of this perfect American family. Well, in the article, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because I want you to read it, but in the article, she's challenging that. Why? Because it never really existed. And if it did exist, it existed for a very, very small subsection of American culture. So when we think about these ideas, like these nostalgic ideas, oh, the good old days, or the way things used to be, often things weren't great for the largest number of people. So when we have ideas like, making America great again, well, when are we referring back to? When was America ever great for every single person in the United States? And it never was. That's a fallacy, right? So we're looking back at these things that actually never existed. And that's what she's doing in this article. She's talking about the traditional family. In fact, she defines it as an ahistorical amalgam of structures, values, and behaviors that never coexisted in the same time and place. We talk about the extended family, the nuclear family. The nuclear family is husband and wife who are friends. They allow the children to make their own mistakes within reason. And then in the article, she goes through different time periods in the United States when we have these ideas about the American family, and she kind of debunks, right, this idea. So read through that. And her main thesis in this is our reoccurring search for traditional family model denies the diversity of family life, both past and present, and leads to false generalizations about the past, as well as widely exaggerated claims about the present and the future. So please read this article in depth. Pay attention to her claims and these common myths and wide beliefs and how she debunks them. Ideas that, women over 40 have a better chance of being killed by a terrorist than getting married, when in fact, that is no longer true. Women over 35 today have a better chance than ever of actually getting married. So look through, make sure you read this article in depth. On the discussion board in your quiz, you'll have the ability to show that you have read and thought about this. But after you've read this, then you're going to watch 2 sitcoms this week, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet and The Donna Reed Show. When we look back at these shows, we tend to think of these as, right, that ideal American time. This is in the 50s and the 60s when life was perfect. And I want you, as you're watching these, to pay attention to how the family is portrayed, what dynamics are on there, and what are the problems, the issue that the family has to deal with. And this slide and the next slide, I'll give you a general overview of the shows, but I'm not going to talk about the plot in this because I want you to watch them and show evidence of your thinking. So The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet aired October 3rd, 1952 to March 26, 1966. It was first on the radio and then it transferred to television on ABC. Interestingly enough, in this sitcom, it actually starred the real-life Nelson family. This was a father and mother who were married, and these were their children. However, they were famous because they were a musical family, right? The father, Ozzie Nelson, was actually a band leader in real life. However, on the show, this occupation's kind of left out, and he joked around that, on the show, the dad's a lawyer. Harriet Nelson is a housewife, and they have 2 sons, David and Eric, also known as Ricky. And if you've heard of Ricky Nelson, this is that Ricky Nelson, the pop icon. And in fact, in the 1980s and the 1990s, there was a group called Nelson. It was Gunnar and Matthew Nelson, long hair, blonde twins. And these were the grandchildren of this family. As the family grew and the sons grew up, in real life they married and their wives became part of the show. Well, what happens with the Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet is it soon became synonymous with the idea of the 1950s and real ideal American family life. Now, the show itself strove for realism, but it often dealt with just run-of-the-mill problems, and you'll see that in the episode you're going to watch. By the mid-1960s, the social climate in America was changing, and the nuclear family seen in the 1950s and the values and ideas were soon quickly become to see a thing of the past. The show was canceled in 1966, and it's still the longest-running live-action American sitcom in television history. And so what you're going to watch is you're going to watch the episode you're going to watch the episode, and I want you to think about what's the problem in this, what has to be resolved. And again, pay attention to the opening scenes, the music that's played, how people are dressed. Now, the other show you're going to watch this week is The Donna Reed Show. This aired September 24th, 1958, and it was on through March 19th, 1966. This was also on ABC. Now, this stars Donna Reed as an upper-middle-class housewife. Alex, her husband, is a pediatrician, and they have 2 teenage children, Mary and Jeff. The show was actually developed by Reed and produced by her husband. And what it shows a typical upper-middle-class family and their problems, such as firing the housekeeper, throwing a retirement party, trying to get time away from the kids. Now, at times it did try to deal with some edgier themes, such as women's rights and freedom of the press. However, the series was sponsored by Campbell Soup Company and Johnson & Johnson, so you have these very family-based sponsors, and if you don't get sponsorship, your show's not going to be on. So they couldn't be too edgy in what they were going to do. It did win many awards. It was one of the top 25 shows in 1963 and 64. Donna Reed was nominated for various Emmys and actually won a Golden Globe in 1963. Eventually, though, she grew weary of the day to day grind, and the show was canceled in 1966 after 275 episodes. And what I want you again to pay attention as you're watching this, pay attention to the opening sequence, how the family is portrayed. And with this episode, really think about how the people in here view each other. Especially, we're going to see the relationship between Donna and Alex in this. It's going to be stressed at times. But I want you to pay attention to who is in control or the head of the family, and who is perceived or think they are. And also, pay attention to how feelings get hurt. And then definitely pay attention. This has a laugh track. Pay attention to what the humor within this is. So these are the shows for this week. Next week, we will pick up with some different shows. This week, we're going to look at feminism as seen through the American family and sitcoms. And we're going to focus on 2 television shows, The Brady Bunch and Roseanne. And this part of the lecture will also talk about the 2 articles you're supposed to read this week. Honestly, this will be a pretty short lecture because I'm going to pose some questions for you and things I want you to think about as you're watching the television shows and reading the articles. So first, The Brady Bunch. The Brady Bunch was on air September 26, 1969 to March 8, 1974, also on ABC. And what happened is this focused around a blended family and their housekeeper, Alice. We had Mike Brady, who was the widowed father of 3 young sons and their dog Tiger. And then Alice, the housekeeper, came with them. And then we had Carol Ann Martin, single mother who has 3 daughters. The creators of the show wanted Carol to be divorced, but the network objected to this. So actually, there's no mention of how and why Carol is single. People just assume she was divorced, but it was never actually said. Now, this was not the first blended family on television. And this was a time when divorce and remarriage was becoming more prevalent in the United States. And the show wanted to represent this new lifestyle. It was created by Sherwood Shorts, and he conceived the idea for the show after reading in the Los Angeles Times that 30% of marriages in the United States had a child or children from a previous marriage. Interestingly enough, the Brady Bunch never achieved high ratings during its primetime run. It was canceled in 1974 after 5 seasons and only 117 episodes, and it won no awards. However, the Brady Bunch became more of a cultural phenomenon because what happens is the episodes were shown in syndication, and they would be aired during the week about in the late afternoon, and this was the time when children were coming home from school. And so these children who would come home from the school in the later 70s and the 80s would watch the Brady Bunch, and that's how it became so well known. Interestingly enough, too, on the Brady Bunch, if you pay attention, the episodes are also written from the standpoint of the children. And the Bradys show this idea of what this harmonious blended family may look like. Now, the episode that you are going to watch is The Liberation of Marcia Brady, and it first aired in 1971. At this time, the National Organization for Women had just formed. So there's things I want you to pay attention in this. First, anytime we listen to or watch one of the sitcoms, pay attention to the opening sequence. Think of how each of the groups are described, right? The lovely ladies raising lovely girls, but then we had, 4 men living all together and they're all alone. But things to pay attention in this episode. Marcia is trying to prove a point, and she wants to show that girls can do everything that boys can do. Well, that's not her exact message what it comes across. What she actually is trying to do is that she wants to show that girls should have the opportunity to do everything that boys can do. And you're going to see this kind of play out funny in the episode. Things to pay attention to. What's going to happen is Marcia's going to decide after a series of events that she's going to join basically the Boy Scouts, the Wilderness Boys, the Frontier Boys, I'm sorry. And so to get revenge, the boys decide that Peter, the middle brother, will join the Frontier Girls. And when you have with this, the Peter has to start selling cookies. Well, pay attention to the reactions of how the boys react when she wants to join the Frontier Girls, and how the girls react when Peter wants to join the Sunflower Girls. And pay attention to the end and think about if the Brady Bunch really got the message across that girls can do anything or should have the opportunity to do anything that boys can do. Because you're gonna see at the very end of the episode, the message kind of gets lost. And this episode goes along with the article I had you read, Television, Generation X, and Third Wave Feminism, a contextual analysis of the Brady Bunch. This was written by Mimi Marconi in 2005. And again, I'm not going to go through it, but just some of the highlights is she says the show is actually quite wholesome, but Generation Xers didn't take these values to heart because the Brady Bunch was seen as kind of such a corny television show that they kind of watched it just to watch, kind of the kookiness, the corniness in it. And then in The Liberation of Marsha Brady, she is also going to talk about in the article this twist that the Brady Bunch seems to be trying to make this feminist statement, but then at the end really doesn't make it at all. In fact, she says, this brief experiment in gender bending ends with the affirmation that the distinction between the domain of femininity and the domain of masculinity mirrors fundamental differences between the biological sexes. And she goes on to conclude, especially with how this ended, that this episode kind of reinforces the idea that it's easy to exist in the feminine world, but it's hard to exist in the male world. And even that women don't really want to be in that world. All right, and then the other episode I had you watch this week is Roseanne. Roseanne was on from October 18th, 1988 to May 20th, 1997. And it starred Roseanne Barr and the Connor family. They were living together in Lanford, Illinois, which is a further out suburb, but somewhere in Chicago, or I'm sorry, it's outside of Chicago, so it's not directly a suburb of Chicago, but it's also not country, if you will. And what happens is we look at this family, it's a working class family that's struggling to get by on a limited income. The family's led by the outspoken matriarch Roseanne, her husband Dan, and they have 3 children, Becky, Darlene, and DJ. And then in season 8, they have a 4th child, Jerry. Jackie is Roseanne's sister, and they have a very close relationship. Now, this was one of the first sitcoms to portray a blue-collar American family where both parents worked outside the home. Also, both lead characters were noticeably overweight, but this was not the target of jokes as it had been in past television shows. And Roseanne deals with many provocative subjects such as poverty, alcoholism, domestic abuse, birth control, teenage pregnancy, race, social class, infidelity, gay rights, sex, and religion. And what's very unique is there's significant portrayal of feminist ideas. This show is female dominated, the household is dominated. However, the women are not in competition with each other like we've seen in past shows. You have this open camaraderie between the women and they help and support each other. Also, issues of homosexuality are dealt with, especially in later episodes. And a lot of this is because Barr's real-life brother and sister are homosexual, and she really wanted to show strong gay characters in the show. In fact, she says, my show seeks to portray various slices of real life, and homosexuals are reality. In its final season, it took a turn. What happened was the family who had always, lower class, working, struggling to pay the bills, well, they won the lottery. They began to travel and have all these many adventures. Well, the series finale was watched by 16 million people, and it was revealed that all of this was actually Roseanne's writing, that Roseanne always wanted to be a writer, but life kind of happened and she never was able to. Well, we find out in the series finale, they're all sitting around the kitchen table, and the kitchen table is very important in Roseanne, and she's looking around at everybody, and you find out things aren't how we thought they were. So, for example, Becky and Darlene are actually with opposite husbands. Becky's with David, and Darlene is with Mark, when throughout the entire series, it's been the opposite, that Darlene is with David and Becky is with Mark, but Roseanne has switched this. Throughout the series, the mother came out as a homosexual, but we find out in the series finale that wasn't really true. The mother's not homosexual, but Jackie is, the sister. And Roseanne says that she made her mother homosexual because throughout their life, when their father was still around, he was abusive, and she just kind of always was under his thumb. And she thought this way it gave her her own identity. And then we find out in the previous season, Dan had had a heart attack. Well, in this episode, the series finale, he's sitting there and he's calling to her. He always called her Rosie. And he's like, Rosie, Rosie. And he kind of fades away. And we actually find out that Dan died. He didn't survive the heart attack. And so that's why that last season became so erratic. That was actually her just trying to find her life without Dan in it. And so, again, this was an extremely popular television show, and it was watched by 16 million people. It actually reached number one in the Nielsen ratings, and it was the most watched television show in the United States from 1989 to 1992. In the episode I have you watching, it's just called The Clip Show. And so it's almost two parts. The first part is you kind of see Roseanne's kind of remembering things. And you get to see, the reason I have you watch this part is you get to see a lot of different glimpses into their lives. Things I want you to pay attention to is look at the relationship between Roseanne and Dan, right? They constantly bicker, but they definitely love each other. They're very supportive, and they have an openly sexual relationship. Also, pay attention to the relationship between the parents and the children, and then between Jackie and Roseanne, the sisters on this show. And then the second half of the clip show is showing what happens in it is that, okay, they're done with production. Roseanne's saying, okay, I'm going to go ahead and close everything down. And you come in, and there are 5 women in the kitchen. And they call themselves the Sitcom Moms Welcome Wagon. So if you don't recognize them, you have Barbara Billingsley, who was June Cleaver from Leave It to Beaver, June Lockhart, who was the mother on Lassie and Lost in Space. You have Isabel Sanford, who was Wheezy on The Jeffersons, Ailey Mills, who played Norma Arnold, the mother on The Wonder Years, and Patricia Crowley, who played Joan Nash, the mother on Please Don't Eat the Daisies. And what you're seeing here is they're coming to welcome her, but then they also have some critiques of her and things that they say she's not doing correctly, and that she's not putting out the image that, the mothers in sitcoms should be. But what's funny is she definitely is able to sway them to her side. And I want you to pay attention to that, how she basically says, well, yeah, that's true, but I'm the one who makes the money. I'm the one who gets to call the shots. And I want you to pay attention to their reactions. And then also the article that I have you read with this. Again, it's Subversive Sitcoms, Roseanne as an Inspiration for Feminist Resistance. Now, this was written in 1992. Remember, the show was actually on for 5 more years after this article was written. And one thing I want to have you pay attention to is at one point the author critiques that Roseanne does not go far enough, especially in the area of homosexuality. Well, most of this, again, this article was written before most of the very strong homosexual characters come to light on Roseanne. But please read through this, but definitely pay attention to those different relationships. And then in your discussion board in the quiz, I want you to think about how these shows show women, not just the mothers, but the portrayal of women from earlier shows that we've watched. Next, we're going to look at the final article I had you read for this section, and we're going to look at Modern Family, the television show, and we're going to see if it's really as modern as it claims to be. Modern Family first aired on September 23, 2009, and it's still running today. It was created by Steve Latvian and Christopher Lloyd, and it's in what we call a mockumentary format, which means the characters know the cameras are there, and sometimes they talk to them. However, we'll often see they kind of forget they are, but often when they make contact with the cameras or even sit there and talk to them, they acknowledge it. And this was a new format for the family sitcom. How we are structured here is we have 3 different family units, but they are all linked together. And first we have Jay Pritchett, who is divorced, and married now for 6 months to Gloria. Gloria is from Colombia. She is also divorced. So this is a second marriage for both of them. And Gloria has her son Manny, who is from her first marriage. And then eventually Jay and Gloria will have a second son together who's named Joe. Then we look at Jay's older children from his first marriage. We have Claire, who is married to Phil Dunphy, and when we meet them, they've been married for 16 years. They have 3 children, Haley, Alex, and Luke. And then Jay's older son is Mitchell, and Mitchell is partners with Cameron. Eventually, they do get married on the show. But at the beginning of the show, they've been together for 5 years, and they are adopting a daughter, Lily, who is Vietnamese. And what happens within the show, we often see 3 different storylines with each family that somehow mingle, intersperse together. The creators actually came up with the idea for the show from their own Modern families. Modern Family has won many awards. It's been nominated for many, many Emmys for both the show and the individual actors. In fact, in 2011, it had 17 Emmy nominations. It did win a Golden Globe for the Best Television Series. And in 2010, it won the Screen Actors Guild Award for Outstanding Performance by an Ensemble in a Comedy. The show has been described as flitting among 3 storylines. It's smart, nimble, and best of all, funny, while actually making a point about the evolving nature of what constitutes family. The show also depicts the increasing way communications technology shapes the way people perceive others and even family members. And you can see this very clearly in a 2015 episode called Connection Lost, where the entire show was shot only using Apple products such as iPhones, iPads, and MacBooks. There are criticisms of the show. Some claim the show is supposed to show a modern family, but many of the traditional stereotypes are still in place. For example, when the show premieres and over the first couple years, both of the mothers, Gloria and Claire, do not work. From the LGBTQ community, many called for Cam and Mitchell for not being shown as physically affectionate to each other. Finally, the show did address both of these issues. We now have Claire working outside the home. Gloria has kind of her own little business on the side. And Cam and Mitchell are a little bit more affectionate. In fact, there was one episode called The Kiss, which was to show them on air kissing. Other stereotypes that are in force when we look at the daughters, Haley and Alex. Haley is the pretty one, but she's also considered shown as the airhead, pretty dumb. And Alex is the smart one, and often her looks are played down. This also is true in cases of Gloria. Gloria is seen as the trophy wife, but she is actually very smart, but at times she hides things from Jay so it doesn't challenge his masculinity. For example, in one episode, they're playing chess, and Gloria is much better at chess than Jay, but she loses the game on purpose so he doesn't get mad. There is praise for the show. Again, portrayal of homosexual characters. And in this, one writer quotes that creators stated that a decade ago, gays would have balked and balked loudly at how frequently Cam tips into the limp-wristed, high-voice caricature. But now, most people get and trust that the audience will know that homosexuals are a diverse tribe and not easily pigeonholed. And this is just a representation of one character and not supposed to be of the entire community. At first, Phil Dunphy seems like a bumbling father figure, but we have to remember he is also a successful businessman, and he is actually the center of joy and fun in the household. The domestic space between Claire and Phil is shared, and it belongs as much to him as it does to her. And they both have a close and openly caring relationship with their families. Many people claim the positive images and storylines are now reflecting a diverse American culture. However, we're going to see this challenged in the article I had you read for this week of preteening trophy wives and effeminate men. Modern Family's surprisingly conservative remediation of the family sitcom genre by Christina M. Leveche. And in here, what she's arguing in this article is that Modern Family is not really as modern nor as groundbreaking as it claims to be. And what happens is towards the end of the 2000s, the family sitcom actually seemed in danger of disappearing. Reality TV was very, very popular and seemed to kind of fulfill that need for the viewing audience. Sitcoms were still around, but the successful ones were more based off the workplace, such as Parks and Recreation, The Office, and 30 Rock. Well, in 2009, again, Steve Lafayette and Christopher Lloyd created Modern Family. And when they created it, they promised to reband, revitalize, renew, and rethink the family sitcom. Levache states that at first glance it seems Modern Family does this, but she states the show falls short of actually challenging our expectations for how families work. And her main argument for this is that it's based on heteronormative society and shows that heteronormativity is still the controlling option in the world. And what we mean by heteronormative is it's a worldview that denotes heterosexuality as the norm, and anything else that's not heterosexual, deviance from it, is somewhat other. And she says, Modern Family, it doesn't challenge it as so much as a model remediation and actual execution, meaning it's trying to fix somehow how we view this heteronormative world. In fact, she says, the show falls short of actually challenging our expectations of how family works. In the end, Modern Family delivers a non normative family that still functions with normative family dynamics. Its modern family largely functions in the way that ultimately reinforce the status quo. And it does this through gender roles, familiar roles, and the family still functions in the same ways as earlier, more conservative ones did. Now, she does say there are differences. One thing that is different is the format, which is the mockumentary. Again, the characters are aware the cameras are there and the cameraman is there. And this, again, is a first for family programming. And the second way, she says, is it's linked to technology. It's showing how the new world, the new family communicates. There's different shows. I already mentioned the Connection Lost one, which was the show shot using only Apple products. And there's another episode called Unplugged, which is a no gadget challenge, where they challenge each other not to use any technology. However, some things that are the same from Modern Family and other classic family sitcoms. All the issues are largely resolved in the 19th minute of the 22-minute show. We see lots of passive-aggressive behavior between the married couples, especially Gloria and Jay. And it does have some edgier ethnic jokes, but again, the baseline is still the same. And then the author looks at the different relationships that are shown. And remember, this article is from earlier on in Modern Family. Some of these issues have been somewhat addressed, but I want you to keep these in mind as you then go watch the episode. So the relationship between Mitchell and Cameron, that we think this is groundbreaking because here we have an openly homosexual couple living together, adopting a daughter, and then eventually getting married on the show. However, Leviche claims they both play two extremely gender normative roles. For example, Mitch is seen as the more male character. He is the breadwinner, he's a lawyer, and his identity is linked very strongly to his job. At the beginning of the show, Cameron is very flamboyant, and originally he was a stay-at-home dad, and he calls himself the trophy wife, and he's seen as the more motherly figure. Now, he does later on get a job teaching football at the high school, and when we're in the situations where he tends to fill the male role, Mitchell then seems to become the more effeminate character. And the author says, through such portrayals, the show implies that a modern gay family must still identify with and embrace gender normative roles of breadwinner and caregiver. And if we look, all three households tend to be structured in the same heterosexual arrangements of breadwinner and caregiver. And your author states, although Modern Family challenges our traditional notions of what constitutes a family with an immigrant trophy wife and gay partners, the families in Modern Family still seem to fill familiar and gender roles in much the same way as they did in more conservative predecessors. Parenting is something a little different. Traditional parenting is arguably the most progressive modern aspect of the show. Here we see Claire and Phil trying to be close friends with their children, especially Phil. Yet they also have different forms of punishment. In the episode you're going to watch, Luke gets punished, and Phil is actually going to shoot him with a BB gun as punishment. And your author calls this more Puriting, Perenting, meaning that he's trying to be more of a friend than a father figure, but Claire and Phil are still obviously loving parents. Also, the male archetypes that are shown within the show. The masculine father figure and husband has been somewhat remade. Mitch is the man in the relationship, but funny enough, he can't fix anything. He can't work any tools, and there's an episode where he's actually terrified by a pigeon. And then Phil, the father and Claire and in the Dunphy household, he is much more effeminate than other male characters we've seen. He was a cheerleader in dance. He loved show choir. And part of it is he wants to show Jay, who is the archetype of the older white male, very masculine, and he wants to prove to Jay that he is manly. Phil works so hard to preserve his masculinity and to perpetuate masculine behaviors around Jay, when in actuality, he doesn't even fully participate in these behaviors in his normal life to begin with. The show does portray the everyday workings of an American family, and the author again claims the show's remediation of genre doesn't quite go far enough. At the core, Modern Family might not be so modern after all. And that she says Modern Family strives to subvert, but in the end represents an ideal of rich, suburban, stable families. What it does is challenge some ideas, especially how we see what the American family physically looks like. But all in all, she claims it's really not that modern. And I want you to keep this in mind as you are watching the episode. And the episode you are watching is Season 1, Episode 1, the pilot. For those of you who watch the show, this will be a blast from the past. But think about this and look at how each relationship is portrayed and see if you agree with the author that actually a lot of these same heteronormative stereotypes are actually reinforced and still in place. And now I will say, in the last couple years, the show has tried to fix some of these critiques. But for those of you who do watch it, think about if they have gone far enough. This will conclude the last lecture on the sitcoms. I'm not going to go into the episode a whole lot. You'll be able to discuss it in the discussion board and on the weekly quiz. And as always, if you have any questions, please let me know.